If you passed the scholarship in the 1920s, you got a place at a secondary school, and in some cases didn't pay the usual fees. You'd really achieved something. The elementary school made a fuss about you, and you probably felt a bit smug. But for many children, there were stronger barriers than the scholarship exam itself. The barriers of poverty and class.
Oh, I went in for them on 2 occasions. They and passed. But there was never any discussion, no Ways and Means Committee to try and get the money for me to go somewhere or other. The reason was, of course, as I said, my father was a soldier and my mother went out cleaning. There wasn't the money.
I didn't get the scholarship because they asked me about it, but I knew that if I won it, I couldn't go because I knew I had to go to work. That's right. So I didn't even go in for a scholarship.
I passed, but I was going to go to Bellevue School, actually. I was going to go to a higher grade school, and most of the pupils in those days were paid for, you know. It was only just a few that won an education scholarship. But all was set for me to go. I went to the school and had an interview, but when I saw all these girls, a few hundred new girls that I didn't know anyone, I was the only girl from my class that was going. My parents were prepared to sacrifice to send me. And so during the school holidays, all my friends were going into the mill. And I couldn't face going to that school all on my own, so my mother had to go down to the education department and tell them that I wasn't going, but it was a blow to my father and mother, but I've lived to regret it.
Money and class, class and money. These persistent and inescapable facts of life have had a profound influence on our schools, and especially our secondary schools. They have always done so, as the history of this famous Liverpool boys' school clearly shows. The Collegiate has been a state school since the Liverpool Education Committee bought the building in 1908. Before that, it had contained 2 more or less separate fee-paying schools. One a commercial school, and the other something rather grander called a high school. Both had been losing money, so the owners sold out.
But firstly, what is the picture trying to suggest about the car? We've had the obvious, that it's like a rocket.
For most of this century, as a maintained school, it's been first a well-known grammar school, and for about the last 10 years, a comprehensive. Under existing plans, the Collegiate will soon be closed down. Its story will end, and the present generation of pupils will be the last of the many who have used the building since it opened in 1843.
It's very, very suggestive for saying
new technology.
New technology.
The building itself is a kind of museum of educational history. Its whole appearance speaks of ways of thinking and feeling long out of fashion, and even of forms of learning for which there is nowadays no call. You could say that this place, its contents and its history together sum up the story of English secondary education and the snobberies and social divisions which have marked it for the last 150 years. In the middle of the last century, the Liverpool docks were not the tranquil places they have since become. The city was then the second seaport of the empire. 4/5 of Britain's rich American trade passed through it. The greater part of Britain's huge merchant navy was registered in Liverpool, and the city's influence reached out over the world. Liverpool was confident, wealthy, expanding, full of pride in the splendor of its new public buildings. There was new money around, and a new and aspiring middle class ready to spend it on, among other things, education. A guidebook written in the 1840s claims too that there was a plentiful supply of congenial work for the laboring classes. The report of the medical officer of health at this time tells us what these rather too pretty pictures leave out. There was also poverty, overcrowding, and sickness on a large scale. Later in the century, in the same series of medical reports, there is vivid photographic evidence of continuing poverty. All the same, the supply of education for the poor from the early 19th century onwards was impressive. Some of the many schools provided by voluntary bodies still exist, a few still in use. The charity they dispensed was austere, and only half the children went to school at all. But as the product of mainly voluntary effort, this was still a remarkable achievement. The Blue Coat School for Orphans, founded in the 18th century, was the best-known Church of England charity. The orphans here were well cared for. There was a feeling around amongst the people who mattered that the poor were doing all right. So the same rich Anglicans who supported this place decided to help the other classes by building a new secondary school. The great parade, which marked the laying of the foundation stone of the Collegiate, which was to fulfill this new purpose, began here. The Liverpool gentry, who on that day formally revealed their intention to build the Collegiate, were starting on a new educational venture, new because it was for the benefit not only of the poor, but of what was then called the great middling class of people, which included the respectable working class upwards through the professional and merchant classes. The foundation ceremony was a great Liverpool occasion. The boys of the Blue Coat Charity School band, none of them of course was ever likely to go to the new school, dutifully provided the music. The parade went up London Road to Shaw Street and was cheered by thousands of people. It was a national event, reported nationally, and all inspired by local voluntary effort. The building was completed within 3 years. The style was called Tudor Gothic, clearly showing its Church of England character. The names of the rich Liverpool merchants who founded the Collegiate are carved in stone over the fireplace of the head study. These men were in fact fervent, in some cases aggressively militant supporters of the Anglican Church. The young W.E. Gladstone, future Prime Minister, actually redrafted the school's written constitution personally. Some loose wording, he thought, might have admitted Baptists, or even, horror of horrors, Quakers to the teaching staff. This would never do. Gladstone insisted that the Christian doctrine to be taught here was to be Anglican, wholly Anglican and only Anglican. And so it was. The place opened for business in 1843. It was called the Liverpool Collegiate Institution, and it certainly wasn't a mere school. The fine new building contained on its top floor an art gallery and a museum. There was also an evening institute and a concert hall, and in addition, no less than 3 different secondary schools for boys of 10+. It was altogether a monument to the Victorian belief in education. The Liverpool Philharmonic Society had installed its organ in the hall, which became Liverpool's leading concert hall. It then, with an extra balcony since demolished, held up to 2,000 people. Here too, lectures and demonstrations on a whole host of topics were provided for Liverpool's citizens, all designed to meet the enormous Victorian thirst for knowledge and self-improvement. And here finally, and only here, the 3 separate schools met for morning prayers or occasions like this prize day. These were the only times the 3 schools did meet together. For the rest of their school lives, though they shared the same building, rigid segregation was the rule. The schools were separated one from the other on principles very similar to those at work in that other great Victorian invention, the railway system. The upper school was the equivalent of the first class. It was designed for people travelling towards gentlemanly professions like the church via Oxford and Cambridge. The upper school staff were themselves all Oxbridge graduates, the prospectus tells us, and the curriculum a classical one. The fare, or fees, 20 guineas a term. The middle school catered for the second-class passengers, fighting their way up to good positions in the Liverpool business community. The staff London or Dublin graduates. Curriculum slightly less gentlemanly, fees 10 guineas. The third class had to rough it a bit, but they travelled hopefully looking for respectable positions in shipping offices. A basic curriculum with non-graduate teachers costing them 3 guineas a term. It was all absolutely clear-cut. And the theory behind it all was explained with complete honesty by the school's second headmaster, the Reverend John Saul Howson. The defining line of separation between the three schools, he said, is a pecuniary one. In other words, the differences were all simply and conclusively to do with money and had nothing to do with age, ability, or inclination. In the many pages of evidence which Howson gave in the 1860s to a famous Commission of Enquiry on Education, Howson describes his system of social segregation in practice and in detail. The boys in the upper school, he told the Enquiry, entered and left only by the main entrance and had exclusive use of the fine central staircase. The other two schools, on the other hand, used the side entrances and got to the upper floor by using the more modest staircases which led off them. The boys all wore gowns, but the gowns were of different quality and had different coloured ribbons. Even the playground itself was divided by walls into separate parts, an arrangement which lasted until the early years of this century. School dinners were priced differently and eaten apart. Going home times were staggered to prevent what Howson delicately called little collisions, no doubt also to prevent embarrassing social encounters between the different classes of parents. Then there were the barriers, sets of iron gates, 2 sets on each floor which divided the building into 3 slices, rather like the party walls of a terraced house. Each school kept to its own section, so these were quite literally the barriers of class. Severe punishment was inflicted on boys who crossed the barriers. A lower school boy could see through the gates into the more opulent area where the upper school lived, but to travel here you had to pay the full 20 guineas a term. There were a very few exceptions. A system of internal scholarships and exhibitions operated. 2 boys, and only 2 boys a year, moved up from each school on merit. A legendary boy called Pendlebury, the son, it was said, of a respectable shopkeeper, made it from the middle school to the highest honours at Cambridge. Pendlebury's achievement became a national story, with an article and picture in the Illustrated London News. He was regarded as a wonder. On prize days there were many heavy jokes about the dizzy rise of a boy called Sinker, no less, the son of a domestic servant, though admittedly a butler, who started off in the lower school. On the honours boards, Sinker's name is inescapable. He collected degrees and prizes with prodigious energy and ended up as chaplain of Trinity College, Cambridge. Sinker and Pendlebury were rare birds. By the 1860s, class consciousness was intensifying. Howson was calling the place a college. By then, too, the area around Shaw Street was entering the social decline, which was to bring it to its present state. For this reason, and in due course, the upper school, the one that counted, left the area and the Shaw Street building altogether. It established itself in new premises in Toxteth, nearer to its customers. Increasingly, it took on its own separate identity and the tone and character of a typical 19th century public school. The inferior Shaw Street branches of Liverpool College went into decline and lost money. In 1908, the Great Split came. The neglected building was sold cheaply, lock, stock and barrel, to the Liverpool Education Committee. It was transformed into a highly selective grammar school with the original name Collegiate revived. The name Liverpool College, on the other hand, is retained by the public school now here in Mossley Hill. The portraits from Shaw Street hang on the refectory wall of the college, our friend Howson among them. The name of Gladstone is not forgotten. And there's an attractive print of the Shaw Street building in its 19th century heyday in the bursar's office. A copy of the founder's original advertisement for the school hangs in the library. It's now, in this middle-class setting, and with its bold reference to the working classes, an ironic reminder of the broader aims of the original foundation. Liverpool College is by no means unique amongst public schools in changing its original purpose, but nonetheless, the respectable working classes for whom it partly catered in its early days don't exactly abound here now. All the same, and by an accident of history, these public school boys are related to the boys of a state school a few miles away in the different setting of a downtown comprehensive. The barriers may no longer be in use, but what Howson called pecuniary differences, money and class, these obviously continue. "61 years ago in this same schoolyard, the collegiate boys of 1924 assembled for the official school photograph. The collegiate was now a maintained grammar school. Its fees were £15 a year, not a trivial sum at a time when industrial wages were around £2 or £3 a week. At least a quarter of its places, by a law passed in 1906, were free. It was now widely believed that there were no barriers to real merit, that an educational ladder existed.